Howdy doody, everybody. Man, can you believe it's been over 2 months since I talked about a ghost story? Regardless, Indiana, I heard you're a little bit haunted over there, so I figured, what better way to say thank you for turning out to my Weird Places video so well than to offer you yet another video detailing the hauntings in your state. Now, quick reminder, I'm trying to hit 100,000 subscribers in 2025. It's a lofty goal, a bit of a long shot, but if you like what you see, it would mean the world to me. If you liked this video, subscribed and commented your favorite haunted place in Indiana down below. It'll never cost you a dime, and it's an easy way to say, hey YouTube, this guy's alright. Anyways, with that, this video should be well over an hour, so sit back, relax, and enjoy a warm beverage as I tell you some spooky tales about your state. The story of the haunting at Indianapolis's Hannah House in Indiana tells a tale about American history and how our understanding of history can be muddled by what was and was not acceptable at the time where the haunting found its origin. To start, the Hannah House was built on modern-day 3801 East Madison Avenue in Indianapolis in 1858 by one Alexander Hannah. This house would have been to the south of downtown and was sort of secluded from unwanted eyes on the property. Alexander was born in Indiana, and he was a businessman and a farmer, but he made most of his money during the California Gold Rush and returned to Indianapolis after the Gold Rush, purchasing a 240-acre property from his father to build a 24-room home. Another crucial detail to the story is that Alexander was a Quaker and abolitionist, meaning he would have been sympathetic to enslaved individuals, which were sadly all too common at the time. Now, here we get into the legend. If you believe the local lore, Alexander, being a Quaker and abolitionist and all, was not only sympathetic to, but actively helping enslaved people gain their freedom. As the legend says, this home was a stop along the Underground Railroad, and slaves were frequent visitors to his basement. He would keep these visitors in the basement during the day, and at night it's said he would shepherd them to their next destination along the Underground Railroad. It's said that one night, Alexander couldn't help these slaves move from one stop to another though, because he had to go out on a business engagement. And of course he couldn't miss this engagement and raise suspicion or take these individuals with him. So these slaves instead just stayed an extra night in the basement that was lit by an oil lamp in the cellar. Now, nobody knows exactly why this happened, but local lore suggests that someone this evening actually ended up tipping over an oil lamp, which subsequently caused a fire throughout the basement, and none of the slaves could escape. When Hannah returned, of course, he was probably mortified, but he couldn't go to authorities with this information. Instead of helping these individuals move towards freedom this evening, Alexander would have to bury them on the property. Some sources say actually in the basement itself. This, if you can't tell, is the primary story telling why the Hannah House is haunted. Because of this, it's said that around the 1960s, people began to report a smell that was sort of barbecue-esque coming from the cellar from time to time, only to venture down and of course find nothing out of the ordinary. Additionally, in the cellar, occasionally the modern-day owners and visitors to the property have reported seeing the apparitions of African American individuals, as well as a man in a suit who is thought to be Hannah walking around his old home. In addition to this tale, there's another less prominent one about the home, that a woman can be seen looking out of the windows of the first floor, holding a child. Now, I should mention Alexander Hannah didn't have a child. Well, at least he didn't have one for long. He and his wife, who was named Elizabeth Jackson before they got married, did successfully conceive, but sadly their child was stillborn. Perhaps, as some say, Elizabeth and her unborn child are the ones looking through the home's windows. Now, if you want to visit this home, you absolutely can. As I said, it's at 3801 East Madison Avenue in Indianapolis. Tours run $8 for adults, and if you're under 12, it's free. The home also funny enough, leans into its possibly haunted past and offers for $500 per night for up to 10 people, paranormal investigation sessions. You can stay in the home from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. during these tours, and you can do your best to connect with the aforementioned spirits of the past. Okay, as someone who's been looking at ghost stories across the USA, I've got to be honest. There are a ton of bridges named Hell's Gate. But what I will say is that they are all relatively unique, so I guess I can't be too mad. In Brazil, Indiana, there is also one of these so-called Hell's Gates, and to get there, it's said that you go north on 59 from West National Avenue for like 4 miles, then you go on West 1350 North for like 200 feet, and you'll eventually come across a tunnel going under some railroad tracks. I think this is the coordinate you'll end up with for the first of what are actually supposedly 6 or 7 so-called Hell's Gates. I'll put them on the screen for you now. Regardless, just follow the railroad tracks that head west and east from Carbone, and you'll find the gates. Now, as the legend goes, these gates are cursed or whatever because a train supposedly derailed on these tracks near these tunnels, and every passenger aboard supposedly perished. Given people survived the friggin' Ashtabula train disaster in Ohio, I sort of doubt that, but hey, whatever you say. Anyways, if you hang out under this bridge, some say for 30 minutes, it's said that phase 1 of the haunting will begin, and that a guard of Hell's Gate will appear who's described as a 7-foot-tall man, I guess an NBA player, and he'll apparently do his best to chase you out of the tunnel. Additionally, after Shaquille O'Neal is done chasing you, there's a legend that has you do a little song and dance, saying that you should flash your car's headlights 3 times into the tunnel, then go through the tunnel and turn around. And if you do so and go through it again but stop in the middle of the tunnel like an idiot, it's said that the graffiti that lines the walls of the tunnel these days will start to glow and leach blood out of it. Now, I don't know about you, but this is pretty spooky stuff to me. Blood leaching out of the walls and all is a little much for me, but if you fancy yourself a thrill seeker, this sounds like the sort of way I would have slaughtered my free time when I was an 18-year-old, so have at it, I guess. The Wolf Mansion in Portage, Indiana, was built in 1875 on a 4,500-acre farm. This mansion, as you might expect, was the crown jewel, so to speak, of the whole farm, and the property were owned by the family of one Josephus Wolf. Josephus was born in Athens County, Ohio, but in 1834, his family moved to the Portage Township, and Josephus remained on this farm until 1854, when he, like the man in the entry before this, also went to California to join in on the hunt for gold, staying there for 2 years and returning with a whopping $3,000, which today would be close to about $111,000 if my estimate is right. With this fortune, he built the foundation to eventually establish the mansion and farm that we see on this property today. It's said that on this property, at least at the time of Josephus's passing, this estate was like that of a small city, covered in fine homes and barns. Visitors remarked that the Wolf home table was always set, and Josephus's family never allowed anyone, visitor, family, or worker to leave hungry. Regarding the mansion itself, it's 7,800 square feet with 18 rooms, including a formal parlor, a kitchen, a study, a sitting room, and many bedrooms. There's also a cupola, which sort of sounds like the little ding-a-ling in the back of your throat, but that's to say it's a dome-like structure on the home's roof, from which you can supposedly see as far as Chicago. Now, there's not a ton of information on how this place became haunted. No event occurred here that was particularly tragic, nor are there any recorded murders in the home, but despite this, there are many who claim the home is downright eerie. To start, it's said that the home is dotted with fleeting figures. You may be walking down the hall and catch someone looking out the window, or perhaps reading a book in your periphery, but when you turn to look at them, there's of course nobody there. Also, ghost hunters, including a group named the Indiana Ghost Trackers that we'll hear more about throughout this video, have toured this place and reported readings from their equipment. And they even took a photo of the mansion where they reported to see a man in the window that, okay, I'm just going to be honest here, it looks like a broom, a bobblehead, or maybe one of those inflatable chickens that goes maybe that was a horrible impression, is in the window. I mean, who knows? Maybe Josephus was a living bobblehead, but this doesn't look like a person to me. Anyways, others report that the lights inside of the home are on from time to time at night, and by that metric, my own home is haunted because I'm a doofus and I leave lights on. But perhaps the best story we have supporting this place being haunted is local lore that suggests that the owner of the mansion went insane when slavery was abolished, and in turn killed all of his slaves and their children. And some stories say even his own family. Now, this would be a spooky story if only the math added up. You see, slavery was abolished in 1865, and this mansion was built in 1875, so I'm not sure about this legend. Anyways, folks say it's haunted. Visitors report capturing dust, orbs, on their cameras. People see figures in the windows of the home, which I should note is a place where people are allowed to enter, and sometimes the sounds of bells can be heard ringing in the home. Heck, there was even one forum I read where someone reported he was getting pulled down the stairs on his way to the home's bell tower. Now, if you were one of these people who have encountered something unusual here, let me know in the comments. I'm seriously open to what I'd consider serious evidence, but in terms of what I'm finding across the internet, it seems like this farm home may have just gotten its reputation because it's an old farmhouse, and there's a reputation associated with that. Alright, forgive me for being a butt, but nothing makes me laugh harder than reading that a place where a children's playground has been established is nearby a reportedly haunted location. Nothing is more fun than pulling a WWE move on someone's childhood, am I right? Anyways, to tell this story instead of making fun of some poor kids, Paul Ruster Memorial Park is part of the Indianapolis Park system. It's a quaint little spot to the east of downtown Indianapolis off of East Prospect Street that has a playground by the parking lot and also has about 1.2 miles of wooded trails, which are perhaps the more popular attraction. This park was established as part of the Indianapolis Park system in 1970, and at the time it wasn't really anything to write home about. It was just a city park. But it acquired a more memorable name, at least, in 1979, when it was named after one Paul M. Ruster, an upstanding community member and teacher at the nearby Lowell Elementary School after he tragically passed away from Hodgkin's disease. Now, as folks started attending this park over time, it would become apparent that something odd was afoot. At first, it was the weekend warriors LARPing as their favorite Dungeons & Dragons characters reporting strange sounds in the park. And then local paranormal societies even caught wind of rumors of these sounds. Soon, at least to the paranormal investigators, the source became clear. They believed it was the Kitley King Cemetery, located just a few hundred feet from the parking lot of Paul Ruster Park. See, back in the day, this cemetery was actually on the old Kitley farm, well over a century ago, though today that farm is obviously gone. And even the cemetery is difficult to find unless you're literally standing on top of it, with the only clue as to where it is being a set of worn-out stone steps that ascend into it from the curb. In this cemetery, there are only two remaining monuments, those to John King and Francis Kitley, this cemetery's current namesake, though as many as 16 others may be buried inside as well. Some, of course, claim that it is one of these 18 individuals that is responsible for the strange noises heard throughout Paul Ruster Park that are known to scare and fascinate locals in equal measure. In terms of what these noises sound like, it's said that if you are far away, they sound a bit like whistling, but as you get closer, they'll be the unmistakable sounds of someone playing the harmonica. There's also another urban legend about where these sounds come from, other than someone that's buried in this cemetery. And this legend says that many, many years ago, some unspecified 12-year-old boy lived on the Kitley farm, and he was wandering around on the nearby train tracks and met some sad fate that most speculate was him being struck by a train, and that one of the unmarked graves within the graveyard, there are many of these, is his. In this legend, it's said that as you walk the path that leads from the soccer fields through the woods and to this grave, you're very likely to hear the sounds of a harmonica. And some to this day even claim to see a slightly translucent boy making his way down East Prospect Street, holding some sort of musical instrument to his mouth. Of course, when they stop to question this boy about what he's doing, he's always gone. First off, I just had to watch a 3-minute video from your county on how to pronounce Kosciusko County. That was a thrill ride. But anyways, in Warsaw, Indiana, you can find an old county jail that was built in 1870 by one George Garnsey, an American architect from Chicago that at the time was acclaimed for his participation in the design of the Illinois State Capitol building. This jail is built from large and rough stone blocks that exude an aura of permanence and strength, with the windows on the buildings being narrow and imposing. These, it said, suggest restriction. In the iron blocks that make up this jail's bones, iron rods were used to reinforce them, preventing them from being damaged over time by prisoners and pushed out. In this jail would live the prisoners themselves, as well as the sheriff, who was always on duty and essentially the warden of the jail too. In this jail, there were 8 documented deaths. The first, actually, was no prisoner at all, and it was actually a worker in the building who was crushed by a slab of Indiana limestone being used for the foundation. Another individual who passed away here was one Annie Chaplin, the daughter of a Warsaw businessman who forged one of her father's checks to get money. Rumor has it this was done to run off with her lover. Anyways, when her father found out, he reacted with anything but compassion, and instead had Annie locked up, refusing to bail her out. Now, Annie eventually caved and told authorities and her father that her lover also played a role in this scheme, and he too was locked up, and her lover did not take this betrayal lightly, at least in his eyes. Instead, when Annie one day was allowed to go to the jail outhouse, her lover would jump the jail's fence and shoot her twice before turning the weapon on himself. It's said that because of this, Annie Chaplin is a frequent flyer on the Spooky Express here at the jail museum. And while occasionally a beautiful woman resembling Annie is seen in the jail, she's most often said to manifest as a woman's disembodied voice that's largely welcoming and polite, actually. Her lover, on the other hand, a local sewing machine salesman who was named Gwen Smith, as in life is a resentful individual in death, and is openly hostile to guests of his now eternal home. Finally, another notable guest at the jail is a former sheriff named John Hammersley. Now, from what I can tell, Hammersley didn't pass away here, but as we've seen in this Haunted Places series, that never stopped anyone from deciding to spend their eternity somewhere. Hammersley, apparently as the sheriff, would go to the building's garage, that is now the museum's research room, to smoke his cigars from time to time. And because of that, in this research room, his apparition is supposedly seen from time to time. Additionally, he's sometimes known to pat folks on the shoulder as they walk by his room, a pretty friendly gesture if you ask me. Also, apparently Hammersley is great with kids, as there's one story about this museum where a child was seen talking and laughing with what must have been an imaginary friend. When the kid's parents inquired about who the kid was having a chat with, he giggled and pointed to a photo of Hammersley on the wall and said he was fun to talk to. Frankly, with all these spooky ghosts out there, I don't think I mind Sheriff Hammersley one bit. He seems like a good guy. Anyways, today, of course, this building no longer acts as a jail, and it's owned and operated by Kosciusko County's Historical Society as the Kosciusko County Jail Museum, where you can feast your eyes on the many preserved rooms, the penciled-in wall art of old prisoners, and the historically important artifacts relevant to this jail. If you wish to visit this museum, my impression from the internet is that it's actually free to visit during the day, and even free tours are available. If you want to walk through the spooky side though, as of early 2025 when I'm editing this, it's about $10 to go on the Haunted Jail Tour. Warsaw, if I'm ever passing that way, count me in for the Haunted Tour. Now, Notre Dame associated folks, as I write this in early 2025, Notre Dame just gave Georgia a good stomping, so as a Tennessee alum, no offense to you Georgia folks, you're good folks, I extend to you a sincere thank you. But with this thank you, I only have bad news. Your college, Notre Dame University, is haunted as can be. Heck, your school even advertises it in the student magazine, and some tabloids even refer to the university as the most haunted place in the whole state. Anyways, they say the most haunted hall on campus is Washington Hall. Washington Hall was built in 1881 as a replacement hall for the campus music hall that burnt down 2 years earlier. On this hall is a beautiful spire that echoes the look of the Basilica and University main building nearby. This hall, of course, was named by one Father Soren after an American hero, George Washington. And early on, this hall would host a barbershop, a spot for transferring money, billiards, and an auditorium for plays, movies, and concerts. Today, while Washington Hall still hosts events on campus, it also holds on to memories of some past residents. For instance, it's said that during this hall's construction, a worker, some say a steeplejack, fell from the building's roof, and because of that, occasionally the silhouette of a figure can be seen plummeting from the top of the hall. Also, a more lively ghost that perhaps brings with it some charm is an old professor named Jim, who passed away in 1919 but decided to live out his days surrounded by his once pupils. See, I guess Jim was a music professor because it's said he enjoys practicing with his French horn in the middle of the night. And it's said that some nights, in the middle of the night when nobody is in the music hall, you can hear lone trumpet-sounding blasts coming from the hall. Perhaps the most famous guest here in Washington Hall is appropriately, at least for this season, an old football player named George the Gipper Gipp. George was a legendary football player at Notre Dame, and legend has it that he ended up locking himself out of his dorm one night and tried to stay in Washington Hall because it was usually unlocked. It's worth noting that George was a steward of this building and was actually known to spend the night here from time to time. This detail is factual. Regardless, Washington Hall, too, was locked, and being December, it was pretty cold outside. Out of options, he decided to sleep on the building's front steps. From this, George would get pneumonia, and this pneumonia would take his life at a young age, 25. These days, because of this, it's said that from time to time this old halfback, quarterback, punter, super player can be seen walking the halls of Washington Hall. And if you do see him, you're not cursed or anything, rather I would say this is a sign from Old Gipper that you're living up to the Fighting Irish name. Now, more ghost stories in a second, but a bit of cool history. There's a term you'll hear throughout history, win one for the Gipper, that was supposedly used as motivation by another Notre Dame player after Gipper's passing to rally the team for a win over the undefeated Army team in 1928. This phrase would go on to be uttered by Ronald Reagan in 1940 and even George W. Bush in 2004 when he honored Reagan. I'm not saying anything political here, I'm just saying Old Gipper has not been forgotten. Anyways, the main building we mentioned is also supposedly haunted. Built in 1879 following another fire that destroyed the original building on this premises, this building is the admin HQ, and it has a few classrooms, though originally it was a building with lodging, classes, and dining. This building is marked by the golden dome atop it today that was added in 1882 and recently regilded. Atop the dome, there's a famous 19-foot-tall, 4,000-pound statue of Mary, the Mother of God, lovingly referred to as Our Lady. Again, to be 100% clear, this building is called the main building. I'm pretty sure the main building is the campus's main building. It's kind of confusing. But yeah, it's just got a really straightforward name. Anyways, in this building, it's said that the spirit of the aforementioned Father Sorin, or Edward Sorin, a French-born priest who actually founded Notre Dame, and also St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas, lingers. Because of this, staff often report an elderly man with a heck of a beard. I'm talking ZZ Top stuff, roaming the halls of the main building. Personally, I find it interesting that a man as religious as a priest would choose or be forced to remain on Earth, so maybe this is someone else, but hey, who knows. It's also said that Father Sorin, and also some of the other priests that have called Notre Dame home, are known to continue dwelling in the Holy Cross Cemetery on campus. It's said that these individuals can sometimes be seen in the distance within the cemetery if you stop by to pay your respects and prematurely open your eyes. There's also St. Liam's Hall, the health services building. It has its share of weird stuff going on. It's said that nuns are known to roam the building, being seen after hours and quietly disappearing when approached. Also, during winter break, security guards frequently report 911 calls coming from the building that, when they arrive, appears empty. Finally, there's Columbia Hall near St. Mary's Lake. This area is less frequented by students, but it's home to retired priests, some of which themselves report strange things. Among the most frequent reports here are sounds of horses galloping outside that are accompanied by an apparition that looks a bit like a brave, like a Native American soldier, who many think is eternally on the lookout for his tribe's burial grounds. Sometimes this brave is even seen riding his horse through Columbia Hall with an unhappy look on his face. Now, I haven't actually been to Notre Dame's campus, though I do want to come for a football game at some point. Let me know in the comments, is this place actually haunted, and where have you had crazy experiences in this hall? In Mitchell, Indiana, sort of in the south-central portion of the state, 30 miles south of Bloomington, there's a home that in modern day is referred to as the Whispers Estate. While most estates are named for a notable family that dwelled within them, the Whispers Estate is named for another reason. That in 2006, when the house started being renovated by the new owners, guests to the home frequently reported hearing voices whispering in their ears. Anyways, let's get into the home's history. Here in 1899, one Dr. John Gibbons and his wife, Jessie, purchased the home from another doctor, George White, and his wife, Sarah. Here, the Gibbons family would settle down, and as legend has it, while they lived here, the first of many tragedies on the property would occur. It's said that a family was riding by the estate in a carriage in the early 1900s, and something unspecified happened, which instantly killed the father and mother, who left their children behind. In an act of at least initial charity, the Gibbons family, so it's said, would adopt these children, though adoption papers have never been found in relation to this estate. Following this, the next tragedy would occur. One of the daughters, named Rachel, a 10-year-old girl, would supposedly start a fire in the home because while inspecting a Christmas present in the home's parlor, she would knock over a candle. She would become badly burnt by this, and she would pass away 2 days later. Sometimes, though, it's speculated she passed not from the burns, but because Dr. Gibbons gave her an excessive amount of painkillers, being embarrassed of her actions. Regardless of how she passed, today on the parlor's wood, you can still see evidence of this fire. Rachel wasn't the only child to die in this home either. A 10-month-old infant named Elizabeth would pass away in the upstairs master bedroom from unknown causes, and Jessie Gibbons, the wife of the family, would also pass away in this bedroom. Additionally, though less tragic, more deaths happened here in the home that were related to the fact that John Gibbons practiced medicine on the home's first floor, and it's rumored that during this practice, John was a bad doctor that was known for abusing his patients. Also, during some operations he would perform, occasionally bits of these patients would be removed, which he apparently disposed of in a large pit grave in the backyard. I don't really want to get into exactly what he threw in there, but it's not pretty at all. Regardless, after John would pass, his wife Jessie and his daughter Helen, the only documented daughter of the family, the only biological one I should say, the others I've talked about were adopted, they would quickly dispose of the home, selling it, as they didn't want ties to this gruesome property. Future owners of the home would also go on to pass away on the property, such as an individual who passed in the master bedroom in the 1950s, not to be found for 3 whole days, and a boy who fell down the front stairs of the home. And also, this boy who fell down the front stairs, his father would also pass away soon afterwards, suffering a heart attack inside of the home. If you can't tell, there is ample tragedy on this property to warrant the stamp of certified fresh on the claims of it being haunted. Now, in terms of the modern hauntings in this home, the parlor is said to be the most haunted spot in the whole house. Here, guests have reported being pushed, scratched, and even bitten by an unknown force, and there's even a mirror in the room, which some report to see the figure of a disfigured child in. Chilling. Additionally, there's a piano that, of course, plays on its own, and there are dolls on this piano that, well, you shouldn't touch, as it's said they bring bad luck to any who so much as brush into them. There's also, of course, plenty of sightings of full-bodied apparitions, even some that are purportedly non-human. There's also old Dr. John's so-called waiting room, where a big black shadow is often seen, earning the nickname Big Black's Room. In the examination room, man, things get worse. People claim to be touched inappropriately here. I'm just going to leave it at that. Candles have been known to fall to the ground while burning, and people have tasted blood in their mouths and felt nauseous while in there. There's also poltergeist activity, with inanimate objects supposedly moving around on their own. In Jessie's old room, again the wife of Dr. John, there's apparently a non-human figure that's been seen in photos in the closet, and a toy car has been known to move around inside of the closet. Also, if you want by the closet, sometimes it's said it will crack open and you'll see an eye peering out at you, and you might be touched by whatever it is that's in that closet. Now, whatever is in that closet, it seems like bad news to me, but they refer to it as Gary. Additionally, throughout the rest of the home, there are scattered sightings of all sorts of things, but if you add them up, they sort of paint a terrifying picture. To be clear, normal guests and paranormal investigators alike have reported EVPs that sound like growling. They've reported being physically choked and pushed, and some have even reported seeing horned entities. Don't get me wrong, there isn't a ton of credence for this sort of thing, but if you believe in the macabre, this all points to there being a demonic presence in the Whispers home that perhaps decided to stick around when he observed how much of a monster Dr. John Gibbons was with some of his patients. Regardless, I want to hear what you think in the comments. My personal opinion is that if the urban legends are true regarding the Whispers estate, this place might have some of the most gruesome stories on this list. So maybe it would be fitting if it was also the home of some sort of demonic, otherworldly presence. Alright, now we're heading 15 miles north of Bloomington to Morgan-Monroe State Forest, where Indiana's supposedly most haunted cemetery lies in wait. Just off of the main park road for the Morgan-Monroe State Forest, sort of near the Walls Shelter House, you can find an old pioneer cabin that contains the graves of 114 individuals, the earliest of which is a War of 1812 veteran named Isaac Hartson that passed away in 1851. There are also Civil War and World War veterans buried in this graveyard. Now, as far as I can tell, nothing particularly tragic happened at this cemetery, but there are quite a few legends about the individuals buried here, so they at least warrant discussion. Perhaps the most famous legend in Stepp Cemetery is that of the woman in black. Now, the story regarding this woman has many variations, but they all follow a similar theme, that this woman's child passed away and was buried in this cemetery, and that she either brought a stool or chopped down a tree to create a stump where she could sit and mourn her lost child. This woman, while doing so, of course, was dressed in all black. In due time, because of this legend, a chair was actually placed in the cemetery, and this chair that still is present was given the name the Warlock's Chair. Some visitors to the cemetery report that in this chair, they'll sometimes see the so-called woman in black, and some even report that she has white wolves that rest at her feet, and posit that she may have been a witch in life because of these wolves. Other variations of the legend lean into the child's father being the one to end the child's life, and that, in turn, the woman in black ended the father's life, and she was subsequently hanged for this. Even still, some legends attach superstition to the Warlock's Chair, suggesting that if you sit in it, or even touch it, you're only going to live another year. Regardless, if you visit this cemetery, you'll find the grave of the supposed child of the woman in black, a small flat gravestone with the name Baby Lester, 1937, emblazoned onto it. Because of this assumption, visitors often, as a token of respect for the lady in black and Baby Lester, will leave a toy behind by the grave. All of this being said, though, in life, Baby Lester was not murdered, and there was no scandal. In fact, Lester didn't even live long after childbirth, and we actually know what happened to his parents relatively well. His mother, rather than grieving eternally or being hanged, would divorce the father after losing Lester, and would go on to remarry someone else and move to Indianapolis, passing away in 2007, which is long after the reports of a woman in black started in the first place. Regardless, there are more infants buried in the cemetery, such as those of Thomas Stepp, so this doesn't completely debunk the legend of the woman in black. There is also another spirit that some report to wander in Stepp Cemetery, that of a teenage girl. If you believe the stories, urban legends say that in the 1950s, this woman was killed in the state forest, and that she was actually dumped near the cemetery. Some even attach this legend to that of the woman in black, saying that this woman's mother spent the rest of her life searching for her and trying to find the killer, but failed, and that the woman in black is the soul of this mourning mother sticking around where the girl met her end. Weirdly, while the 1950s timeline doesn't necessarily match up, the fuel for this particular urban legend is thought to have possibly been the disappearance of one Anne Harmeyer in 1977, an Indiana University student who was reported missing when she started missing classes and whose body was found in a cornfield about 15 miles north of the state forest. There's also less prevalent urban legends regarding the cemetery. One of these involves a woman with hooks for hands that dwells here at night, watching over her deceased son because he was scared of the dark. Finally, there are true tales of a snake-handling religious sect called the Crabbites, whose leader was one William Crabbe, and whose religion was sort of circus-like. They would basically draw people in to observe and be mesmerized by the practice of handling poisonous snakes. There are actually reports about this sort of activity going on in the cemetery, with individuals getting chased out of the region because of this. If you can't tell, Stepp Cemetery is not only steeped in urban legend, but also history, and it's no wonder people continue to return here to this day to look for ghosts. Alright, this one's a short one. In Williams, Indiana, a community about 27 miles south of Bloomington, there's a covered bridge that was built in 1884 and is the longest double-span covered bridge in the entire state, sitting at about 400 feet in length. This bridge crosses the East Fork White River connecting Huron and Williams Road, and admittedly, these days to me, it looks like it's closed off to automobile traffic. But looking at Google Maps as late as about 2009, you can tell that you could drive inside of it. Regardless, today you can still walk inside of it, at least, if you dare that is. Because as the legend goes, back in the day it said a man was crossing this bridge on horseback, and something spooked the horse, which caused it to leap into the water with the man on its back. Pretty unfortunate. As the story goes, because of this, if you venture towards the bridge at midnight, you'll be able to hear the sounds of this phantom horse neighing, accompanied by the man's haunting screams as they fell towards the river below. Indiana's Scott County Heritage Center and Museum in modern day is located at 1050 South Main Street in Scottsburg, Indiana. And this building isn't modern by any stretch. Rather, it was built in 1892 as a replacement for the old Poor Farm building, which was built in the area when the county seat was moved to Scottsburg in 1874. See, back then, state law in Indiana required all counties to have a poor farm to care for county residents that didn't have family to care for them, or enough money to be cared for, a condition many faced at the end of their lives. A poor farm back in the day was sort of explained in the name. It was a farm where the poor would come and live in exchange for working. Throughout this series, we've seen many of this sort of establishment, usually in the context of facilities for the mentally unwell. At least that was what poor farms in Michigan were often known for. Now, being a building that was built over 100 years ago that usually at the time housed people near the end of their lives, it is of course rumored to be haunted by a variety of ghosts. To start, on the main floor, folks report seeing a ghost in a flannel shirt in the entryway. Most, to be frank, refer to this ghost as Bubba, which is, funny enough, what I call my dog, and most accounts of old Bubba appear to be that he is inquisitive and even polite to guests. Personally, given he wears flannel and is reported to be nice, my inclination is to think that he might just be Mr. Bullen, and this might just be his secret summer home. It wouldn't surprise me if he chose to live somewhere a little bit strange, dark, and mysterious after all. Bubba is known to be attached to a woodhopper that was donated to the museum. This woodhopper is kept in the display room, and funny enough, the museum blames Bubba's presence near this hopper for the room being strangely a bit warmer than the rest of the house during the winter, despite having central air. Personally, I always thought that ghosts were into cold air, but what do I know? There's also a ghost named Lester that dwells in the upstairs room of the old poorhouse, and a ghost named Mary that is possibly the best known ghost in the home. She supposedly smells really bad, like sewer gas, and that's how you know she's around. In life, Mary was one of the poorhouse residents and frequently invited cats into the home for food. It's thought that this is why occasionally the sounds of a ghostly little cat purring and meowing can be heard in the building by staff and volunteers. They've looked high and low for a real cat making these sounds, but they have yet to find one. Finally, there's a woman named Lillian who smells of lilacs. Think old lady perfume, according to the museum at least. Perhaps she wears this to offset Mary's stank. Now anyways, that's the list of ghosts. I couldn't find a ton on this museum or its history other than this, but if you want to visit the museum, it looks like they have a variety of activities such as farmers markets in the warmer months of May through September, and you can even just waltz right in during working hours most of the week and on Sundays from noon to 4. Entrance to the museum is free, and it looks like they have a variety of rotating exhibits, so go check out some regional history alongside your spooky stuff. In Oakland City, Indiana, sort of in southwest Indiana, you can find a small private university that's affiliated with the General Baptist Church. Funny enough, the only university in the whole USA affiliated with the General Baptist Church. This university was founded in 1885, and it's relatively small with a present enrollment of about 1,200 students on the university's main campus, and it's fully accredited with about 40 undergraduate programs. And if you believe the legends, it also has one haunted building on campus. This building is Cockram Hall, or perhaps better known as the William M. Cockram House, a historic home in the city that was built in 1876. This two-story Italian villa-style home has a three-story tower, and it's said that in this tower, the wife of the home's namesake, who was Lucretia Cockram, was going through a tough time and hanged herself. Because of this, it's said that if you take a look at this building late at night, you're liable to see doors swinging open with nobody on either side of them. Additionally, there's sometimes a bright orange glow that shines out of the windows of the home that startles onlookers. So I had to do a little bit of digging here, and I hate to say it, but if we are to believe the obituaries published in the Oakland City Journal, Miss Lucretia Cockram absolutely did not hang herself. Rather, as is recounted in the Oakland City Journal, Miss Cockram died at home surrounded by family following a bout of pneumonia, which hit her hard given she had asthma. So, not hanging. Case closed on this one, I guess. I mean, to be clear, this was her home in life, so she totally could still be haunting it. But whoever is walking around saying she hung herself is dead wrong, if you catch my drift. Anyways, if you've heard another story about why this place might be haunted, let me know. I'd love to hear it. Diana of the Dunes is a nickname that was given to Alice Mabel Gray, an extremely well-educated woman who lived in the late 1800s and until 1925. Diana was born in and spent her early years in Chicago, even attending the University of Chicago, where she was said to have been adept in mathematics, astronomy, Greek, and Latin. Briefly after university, she worked for the U.S. Naval Observatory, but after working for about 10 years, she became somewhat resentful of her work, and even of city life. During all of this time, Gray was known to visit the dunes of northern Indiana, having a fondness for the area and its beauty. This was an era when Lake Michigan coastlines were viewed as a waste of space, so to speak, and as prime location for the U.S. steel industry to further develop at the cost of the natural landscape and habitats along the lakeside. Because of these development efforts, conservationists began advocating for the conservation of Indiana's lakeside dunes, and Diana Gray would play a memorable role in this effort. In 1915, at 34, Gray would move to the dunes of northwest Indiana, and would live here alone in an abandoned shack she lovingly referred to as Driftwood, near the beach. It's worth noting, hermits were not unusual in the region at the time, but it was unusual for one of these hermits to be a young woman. While she was here, she spent much time reading, but also began to write about ecology and history of the region that the dunes were in. And over time, she gained notoriety because she lived such a secluded life in the area. Funny enough, it's said that she was seen bathing on the beach by fishermen, and this is how the stories of her began to spread. These news stories over time would grossly exaggerate Diana, sometimes even speaking about her as if she was some sort of nymph. And through these exaggerations, she gained the name Diana of the Dunes, likening her to the mythological Roman goddess Diana that was considered the patroness of the countryside and nature, hunters, wildlife, childbirth, crossroads, the night, and the moon. Gray would go on to start speaking publicly about the dunes, and over the next few years would bring substantial attention to the need to preserve this piece of Lake Michigan coastline. Ultimately, her efforts would be critical to establishing the area as a nature preserve and ultimately as the Indiana Dunes National Park. Gray, of course, would pass away eventually. She refused hospitalization and would pass away at Ogden Dunes of uremic poisoning in February of 1925. She was buried in Oakland Cemetery in Gary, Indiana. Now, this is where facts end and urban legends begin. It's said that Diana loved the dunes so much that she never actually left. They say that if you're walking the shores of Lake Michigan, in the Chesterton, Indiana area, near Ogden Dunes, or even in Indiana Dunes National Park, particularly if you're there late into the night, you might get a glimpse of a woman running along the beach, or perhaps diving into Lake Michigan. If you do, you might be running into Old Alice. Funny enough, this is one of the few instances where ghost hunters galore make their way into an outdoor location rather than a haunted house, mansion, hotel, or cemetery. And plenty of ghost hunters who have prowled the beaches of Lake Michigan claim that they've either seen Diana's apparition or heard an EVP from her in areas that were significant to her life. In San Pierre, Indiana, there's perhaps the wildest story of all of them on this list, one that I'm not even sure counts as haunted, and maybe belongs more appropriately in a weird video, but I suppose since it involves a human passing away, I might as well include it here. In short, there was a bridge built in 1910 in San Pierre, Indiana, that's officially known as Old County Bridge number 99. It's a 120-foot long metal truss bridge that crosses a waterway known as the Elkham Ditch. I should note, in modern day, this bridge can only be accessed from private property, so the only legal way to get close to it is to paddle or swim to it, I guess along the Elkham Ditch, which you can get to from the nearby Kankakee River. At this bridge, there is an absolutely ridiculous tale that urban legends parrot as true that supposedly happened in the 1950s. This tale is hilarious to me, frankly, but apparently, for whatever reason, a couple was honeymooning in Indiana, and they were near this bridge, and happened to meet a dog on it. Back then, you could drive on this bridge, and it connected the road South 1100 West across the ditch. Nowadays, it's worth noting this is hardly even a private road. You can tell the area was at one point a road, but it's really overgrown, and what was once public land here was purchased for the purpose of farming. Anyways, this couple, after meeting the dog, apparently got back in their car, but when they started driving, the dog ran in front of them, causing them to swerve into the nearby river and decapitating the bride. Now, instead of there being a ghost of a human that haunts the area near this bridge, for some reason the woman's body remains, but when folks see her apparition, it has a dog's head. You can apparently tell she's nearby because of growling noises and howls. To be honest, this one reads like a story from an episode of Too Many Spirits and is hilariously ridiculous. But maybe I'm totally off base and this is the ghost most likely to exist on this whole list. Let me know in the comments if you've seen the dog-headed woman at the Old County Bridge. In Evansville, Indiana, on grounds where circuses used to set up camp, a library began being built in 1876 by one Willard Carpenter, Evansville's so-called pioneer of public charity. Willard was a man that was ahead of his time. When slavery existed, he was an agent for the Underground Railroad, and when he built this library, he insisted that it be maintained for the free use of all persons who may desire to consult it, including African Americans. Willard's library would be completed in 1885, when on March 28th of that year, visitors would feast their eyes upon this beautiful Victorian Gothic building. Now, when Willard Carpenter passed away, he would give this building away, and this is the origin of the supposed haunting in this building. See, Willard's daughter, Louise Carpenter, was not happy about this. She believed that when her father wrote the will, he was not of sound mind, and she thought she deserved control over the library, suing the library board. She would go on to lose this case, but it said that upon her passing, she would never let that go. At least in her mind, this library belonged to her. Now, the library is said to be haunted by a woman referred to as the Gray Lady. This haunting will start with the smell of perfume and strange rustling noises being heard. And ultimately, if you're lucky, or maybe unlucky, you'll see her apparition, a gray specter that floats through the library that, in the afterlife, she clearly believes is her property. There is also another tale about this supposed Gray Lady that haunts the library, that it's actually the ghost of a former librarian whose child fell from a ladder in the library while she worked there. Now, this child, from what I can tell, was A-okay, but this turned the librarian into a worrier, and even after death, she's now known to watch over the patrons of the library. In this incarnation of the Gray Lady, she's a sort of guardian angel-like figure, and it's said that patrons of the library, especially children, have sometimes found themselves nearly falling over on a library ladder, but were suddenly steadied by unseen hands. Now, regardless of who the Gray Lady is, it's said that you're most likely to see her staring out of the south-facing windows on the library's second floor, observing the people and train tracks below her. Funny enough, webcams were installed in the library beginning in 1999, and these webcams were installed specifically to keep an eye out for the Gray Lady. As of now, there are 6 of these. I'll put the link for these on screen, and right here, as you can see, the library refers to these as ghost cams, and using them, I can live stream the library to my computer, and keep an eye out for the Gray Lady myself. Pretty awesome, if you ask me. Now, some fun facts. According to the library itself, the Gray Lady was last seen in 2010 by the assistant children's librarian, and in 2007, psychics were able to verify that the ghost had been there. I wonder if these were the same psychics that told my friend that her male child was going to be born a female before she could determine their sex. Regardless, additionally, policemen semi-recently, in 2010, also responded to an alarm going off in the library and spotted 2 individuals in an upstairs window, who they were unable to find inside of the library when they entered. Now, regardless of if you believe the legend, every October, ghost tours are offered at the library that attract hundreds of people. So if you choose to go, keep an eye out for her telltale perfume smell, or her favorite pastime of turning on the sinks in the bathroom and moving around books. Tunnelton, Indiana, funny enough, and perhaps appropriately, gets its name from a big old tunnel that runs through it, which is appropriately named the Big Tunnel. This big tunnel is 1,731 feet long, and it was built in 1857 before Tunnelton was even laid out. This tunnel, of course, wasn't for an interstate highway or anything, it was for a railroad that ran through town, the Ohio and Mississippi Railway. Since this tunnel's inception in 1899, a shorter but still massive 1,700-foot tunnel, referred to as the Little Tunnel, has been cut. Anyways, what's scarier when you're approaching a deep dark hole that you're going to be in for a couple of minutes on a train than knowing that the tunnel ahead of you is full of ghosts? If you buy the stories, the most common apparition is a man that's missing his head. Rumors say that this isn't necessarily due to an accident or anything, but rather that there was a graveyard above the tunnel when they started digging, and that this headless man was a resident of said graveyard. At one point, it said they hit the graveyard, and bodies began to fall into the tunnel from the ceiling. This man now is the sole resident of this tunnel and enjoys walking along it with a glowing lantern in one hand, and of course, his head in the other. Other phenomena in this tunnel include screams heard from it, which are attributed to a horse and buggy that crashed into the river below the hill this tunnel is carved into. There's also a final legend, one that says Henry Dixon, a 35-year-old night watchman, was found deceased just 200 feet from the tunnel entrance in 1908. His head had a fatal wound to it, and the lantern he carried the night before was still burning, and discovered by the tracks. It's thought by most that this was a robbery gone wrong, and some even posit that the man was transported here to be obliterated by a passing train that would make it hard to identify his remains. Some say this man is the modern man with a lantern that can be seen in the tunnel. In Brown County, Indiana, at the edge of Brown County State Park, there's a hotel named the Story Inn that many offer the accolade of the most haunted hotel in the state. Technically, this inn is located in Nashville, Indiana, though its namesake is for the town of Story, and the inn is the oldest country inn in the state, though I will admit that's sort of a specific definition. In 1851, Story was a lumber community founded by one George Story, a medical doctor that was associated with the timber harvesters that operated in the area, and this town had everything from a church to a general store to a post office. It really had everything you needed in a small town back then, but the Great Depression hit the town hard, and by the 1930s, Story had lost half of its population. Eventually, the main road cut off access to Story, and the place essentially became a ghost town. This was generally the case until 1999, when one Rick Hofstetter literally bought the whole town. Today, because of this, Story is a bustling metropolis with 3 people and 4 dogs living in it. Now, I should say up front, the entire town of Story is the Story Inn. These days, it's a hotel with a tavern and a restaurant, a garden and a barn, and also a few cottages. And it's sort of a popular wedding venue too. In the rooms you can stay in, you'll also not be treated to any modern creature comforts. From what I can tell, there are no televisions, phones, or really anything. And there's only Wi-Fi in the tavern and dining room. Looking at the inn, it's honestly not really haunted looking, just sort of quirky looking. Regardless, apparently shortly after Rick bought the town in 1998 and opened the inn, he unexpectedly began to find memos from guests in the guest books, suggesting that they had observed so-called paranormal activity. The most common account was guests citing something that they were referring to as the Blue Lady. This Blue Lady was said to have hypnotic blue eyes, and it's said that she smelled of cherry tobacco. Guests would also apparently find items in their rooms that they didn't think were there before, and these items were typically blue in color. In life, it said that this blue lady was actually the wife of Dr. George Story, and throughout the hotel, including in a room devoted to her I'll speak to in a second, there are photos of her pictured on the wall. If you can't tell, there's a theme here, and this theme is only further exacerbated by the fact that the inn now has a blue lady room, which it markets as the room that the blue lady is most often observed in. It's said that if you want to see this so-called blue lady, you can actually summon her by turning on a blue light next to your bed. Now, I actually snooped around on the internet for folks that stayed here to see if anything weird happened in their rooms, and I found one creepy account of an individual who stayed here in the blue lady room. This person, after checking in, went to use the bathroom and noticed that, as she was in there, the photo on the wall of the blue lady actually flipped upside down. Looking at her before and after photo, this detail was clear. One thing of note though, in both of the photos there was another detail I noticed. The blue lamp that is used to summon the so-called blue lady was turned on. The Ammons family haunting is sort of a case that makes you scratch your chin. On one hand, the tales and the authorities involved that confirm these tales make you say, holy moly, this might be the real deal. But then when you read the subsequent accounts, it all sort of comes crashing down. Regardless, let's tell the story. This story starts in November of 2011, when one Latoya Ammons and her mother Rosa Campbell, as well as 3 children, moved into 3860 Carolina Street in Gary, Indiana. Things supposedly started out strange, as just a couple of days after they moved in, the front porch was continually being swarmed by black flies. Additionally, the family frequently heard footsteps in the basement, and doors in the home would open and shut on their own. Rosa Campbell, the mother of Latoya, also apparently saw a shadow person in the living room, even claiming that she was choked by an unknown entity that I assume she was likening to the image of this shadow person. Things ramped up from here as more family members became involved. For instance, Latoya Ammons' daughter, the 12-year-old, supposedly levitated above her bed while she had a sleepover with a friend, and this levitation only ceased when her friend began to pray. Also, the older son, the 9-year-old, was thrown across a room in the home. The younger son even apparently became possessed, and his eyes supposedly rolled into the back of his head before he started chanting at his sister, "It's time to die, I will kill you," before growling at her. To be honest, this is hilariously on-brand behavior for a little brother to exhibit towards his sister, but I digress. Anyways, the family, after this, reached out to a doctor, one Jeffrey Onyukwu, in 2012, who performed a home visit, upon which he described the family as delusional, and the children were taken to a local hospital where the younger boy acted like an animal, to be honest, thrashing about and being unreasonable. As you might expect, the next stop was the Department of Child Services, whose employees, upon coming to the home, apparently observed the younger boy walking up the wall backwards, and the whole event led Charles Austin, the police captain, to remark that they thought paranormal activity was involved in this saga. Heck, a photo was even published in the Indianapolis Star with a supposed shadow creature in the house. This whole saga was finalized when exorcisms were performed on the children, who one Reverend Michael Maginot concluded were being tormented by demons. The family then moved to Indianapolis in 2012, and it's said the episode ended here. So this is the ghost story. Now let's get into the dissenting opinions. To start, the doctor I mentioned that was involved didn't witness anything that defied logic to him. He thought the whole Ammons family haunting was a delusion, and noted that this wasn't the first time the children were known to act out. Additionally, the police chief, who thought this was all paranormal, was an admitted believer in the supernatural, and the photo of the shadow person was not even an official photo taken by the police. Additionally, the reported supernatural events were woefully exaggerated. The daughter that was thrown off the bed was apparently more realistically described as throwing herself off the bed, and the boy that walked up the wall backwards was holding his grandmother's hand while doing so, which he likely just used as leverage to walk backwards up the wall. Additionally, even the landlord chimed in, claiming that none of the prior tenants of the home had any haunted experiences, and he noted Ammons was behind on paying for the lease, and used these paranormal claims to avoid paying him. The tenant, who moved in afterwards, for instance, experienced absolutely nothing. Psychologists even noted that the youngest son only really acted possessed when he was challenged or asked questions he didn't want to answer. In short, this whole event is probably better described as a hoax rather than a haunting, but who am I to judge? If you disagree, you know where to tell me. My opinion is personally that my butt cheeks are probably more haunted than this so-called demon house, or at the very least, there are probably more unexplainable noises coming from them. The Culbertson mansion belonged to one William S. Culbertson, who moved to Indiana from New Market, Pennsylvania when he was 21. He came seeking employment and found it in spades, going on to become a clerk at a dry goods store. By all accounts, Culbertson was exceptional when it came to business, and went on to start a utility company, leading him to become one of the richest men in the entire state of Indiana in the mid-1800s. This money would lead to his involvement in civic affairs, where he paid for the construction of the Culbertson Widows' Home. Yes, this was a home for women who had become widowed, and it provided shelter, food, and clothing for them. He would also be a trustee of the First Presbyterian Church in town, and founded a home for orphans. During this time, Culbertson would construct a mansion, the mansion known today as the Culbertson Mansion. This construction would occur between 1863 and 1867, and would end up costing a total of $130,000 between the lot and the home. Keep in mind, this was in 1800s money. Today, this would be close to $3 million by my estimate. Now, like many old mansions from this time period, the Culbertson Mansion is rumored to have held on to a handful of faces, and there are a few urban legends surrounding the place. The first urban legend I'll cover is that of the Culbertson's second wife. See, William Culbertson was married 3 times, having some children with the second wife, who passed away. And as the legend goes, this second wife stayed in the home to watch over her children from beyond the grave. And given the third wife of Culbertson was mean to the children, she decided to haunt the property to keep this third wife in line and ensure she was kinder to her stepchildren. Now, in addition to this stepmother of her children, it's said she'll also keep an eye on you if you're visiting. Some have even reported being touched or grabbed in the home, or have seen an apparition in the mirror behind them, staring daggers through them. It's said if you experience this, you're probably seeing this second wife. On site, there's also a carriage house where it is said that there was a fire from a lightning strike in the late 1800s. Now, I can't find out how many people or animals were inside of this carriage house, but it's said that basically everyone and everything inside perished from the fires spreading too fast for them to escape. Because of this, in the rebuilt carriage house that sits on the same land as the old one, you can supposedly observe everything from poltergeist activity, see things moving around without ever being touched, to the sounds of whispers that are just out of sight. And when you check where they're coming from, you'll of course be met with nothing but silence. Now, if after hearing these tales you still choose to visit the Culbertson Mansion, adults can visit during operating hours for about $12, and during the Halloween and Christmas seasons, it looks like they host Halloween Haunted House and Krampusnacht events that they refer to as the House of Anguish at the Culbertson Mansion. Hey, I love it. What better setting for a fake haunted house than one that might show off a trick or two because it's a real haunted house as well? Let's be honest with ourselves. Middle school sucked, at least for me. In my head, I was one of those poor kids with the life is pain outlook on life, despite having a perfectly normal household, which I acknowledge I was extremely lucky to have. This being said, teenage angst is bad enough, and I genuinely feel for any poor kid that has to attend a middle school that also has ghosts inside of it, which is the case for the poor students of Kahler Middle School in Dyer, Indiana. See, in front of this middle school, there is an individual buried in a cemetery that is the school's namesake, one Mrs. Kahler. Additionally, if that's not spooky enough for these poor puberty-afflicted kids, there are photographs of Kahler throughout the school to remind them that there's a dead person buried in front. In this school, because of this, it's said there are not just children bouncing off the walls, but there is also poltergeist activity that causes stuff like clocks to fly off the walls. Clocks flying off the walls is actually a really common phenomenon here. You'll hear more about it. One story in particular in this light is from Miss Leta Sena Lopez, an instructor at the middle school, who described in one account that lights in the band room kept flickering on and off, and school maintenance couldn't identify a culprit. Turns out it was the anniversary of Agnes Kahler's passing. Beyond this, items on the wall, of course, fly at instructors and students, one even hitting a teacher in the head and sending her to an emergency room. And one clock in the main office apparently flashed help one day, directing individuals to the number of Agnes's old classroom, a classroom that no longer exists in the school. Finally, the poor friggin' janitors note the frequent occurrence of seeing apparitions when they're cleaning up the school after a long day. Poor janitors, they really get the worst jobs of all of us, trapped alone with the ghost cleaning up our crap, sometimes literally. Mistletoe Falls, also sometimes known as the Witch's Castle, is an old stone home that's in Utica, Indiana, basically across the river from Louisville, Kentucky. A place that's known for witches in its own right, that you can attribute to the witch's tree there, which I covered in my first shorter Kentucky video. To be frank, this home was once known as Mistletoe Falls, which was built in the 1940s. It wasn't shabby at all. It was a nice stone home with everything from a fireplace to a chapel on the property. This home at one point was sold to Joseph Biaggi, and this individual's stepson would end up setting the home aflame, casting it into the abandoned and overgrown state you view it in today. Here, there are a few urban legends and one true story. To start, the urban legend is that witches lived here, and that the townspeople of Utica weren't fans of that, so they went up and burned the home to the ground. In exchange, while the witches' bodies were gone, their souls remained and cursed the people of Utica. To be frank, the story never says, at least when I've been looking for it, what this curse caused, but that's the first story. There's also a legend that says the ghost of a young, maybe a 7 or 8 year old girl, dwells on the premises, and she's often seen as an apparition with long black hair and a white dress. Perhaps this tale of the young girl is informed by a true event that sort of took place here, as back in 1992, 12-year-old Shonda Scherer, who was abducted by a group of teenage girls and ultimately killed in Madison, was taken here on this evening. She wasn't harmed or tortured here, to be clear, but she did come here, and that is a sad truth. Now, regardless of what you believe, this place is rumored to be haunted as all get out. And because of that, especially around Halloween, people come here from across the multi-state area to see this so-called Witch's Castle, that is in actuality the ruins of a very nice 1940s home that, from what I can tell, hasn't seen any death on the premises. Now, as of an article I'm referencing from 2022, it looks like the property was for sale for about $285,000. So who knows, maybe as I write this, the home is being restored, but as it stands, I've seen no reporting of it. Regardless, if you want to visit this site yourself, please ask permission. Given the property is being sold, it's clearly private property, and I cannot advise you to step foot on it. On 100 North, a road just west of US 45 in Jasper, Indiana, sort of outside of Logansport, there's a super steep valley where the road drops and rises, and at the top of this so-called Devil's Dip, there is a supposedly haunted spot known as the Shiloh Christian Church, which is an old Methodist church in the area. Now, it's tough to find substantial information about this place, but apparently there was a fire here that caused this place to be so haunted. If you believe the story, this occurred in the 1800s, and an entire congregation was trapped inside of the flames which engulfed the church. Today, it said visitors can hear whispers on the property, and that sometimes apparitions of individuals in prayer can be seen there. There's also a fun urban legend regarding the property, which I found scarcely documented, but I love these sort of prompt the ghost to haunt you legends, so here it is. In short, it's said that if you run around the church 3 times, a child will appear from the bottom of the church, and will pop out to scare you, coming from the basement. This is likely why individuals say that the basement of this old church is the most haunted part of the place. Anyways, you'd think if a whole congregation passed away as late as the 1800s, there would be word of it in newspapers, but I found it tough to find anything related to this place. In my eyes, it's probably just a creepy place in a creepy cemetery surrounded by creepy woods. The modern church is frankly in decent enough condition from what I can tell, and, well, I don't know what to make of this. Everything seems pretty normal to me. I can't give this the certified fresh haunted rating like some of these other stories. Man, it always excites me when we visit a place that's been on ghost adventures. Literally every time I hear about this show, I remember the episode where Billy has a sudden impulse to drink more whiskey and they act like he's been possessed. My man, just admit it, you had a long week. Anyways, in Newcastle, Indiana, there's a spot called the Thornhaven Manor. This manor was built on farmland in the 1840s and almost looks like an Italian villa at first look from the outside. The home was built by Simon T. Powell, who was a wealthy local, and it was surrounded by thousands of acres of land, and at the time it was the largest home in the entire county. Here, for a while, Powell would live with his wife and some of his wife's children from his previous marriage, in addition to 4 of their own children that they would have. One of these children, at 2 years of age, would sadly pass away on the property, and another at the age of 27 would pass. This child was named Esther Catherine, or Katie. Apparently there's some uncertainty here about her name. Regardless, while these individuals lived here, not only was the home grand, but it's said that it had a meaningful purpose, too. If you buy the legends, it was a stop along the Underground Railroad. Also, here, Powell himself would pass away on October 5th of 1901 at 80 years of age, leaving the establishment to his children and his wife. Now, it should be no surprise to you. If someone passes away in a home and that home isn't thoroughly renovated, they're going to say it's haunted, and aligned with this are the many reports of strange activity and sounds in the house. To start, if you're on the first floor, it's said you're liable to hear someone or something scooting or being dragged around on the floor above you, and often these sounds are followed by rapid footsteps. Sometimes, if you hear footsteps, you'll also hear doors slamming in the home, which to me sounds like you may have just woke up a squatter, but hey, maybe it's also a ghost. There are also supposedly shadow people seen in the home's servant quarters, and these shadow people, if you buy it, have also been seen via thermal imaging, using cameras to observe the windows from the outside. There's also claims of lightheadedness and dizziness, which are reported as individuals have walked up the home's main staircase, which, come on, you're just out of shape. Do the stair stepper twice a week at Planet Fitness and try again and see if you're still dizzy. I don't think this is haunted material. Anyways, reports I'm reading say that mediums, the oh-so-reliable speakers for the dead, claim there are upwards of 40 ghosts haunting the home, some of which are those of deceased travelers along the Underground Railroad who sustained injuries on their way to the house. Now, as of 2018, I'm fairly certain this property has belonged to an individual in Newcastle named Steve Miller, who bought the home to make it a rental property. He claimed in an interview I'm reading that the owners wouldn't talk to him when he was inquiring about it, perhaps because of the spooky skeletons inside. But regardless, he purchased it and even invited paranormal investigators who informed him of all of this stuff after he experienced some weird happenings on his own. These days, it sounds like Miller, in addition to looking into the home's history, is trying to restore the property to its former glory. So maybe soon, or even now, we'll have a beautiful new haunted Airbnb on our hands in Newcastle. In 1907, the state of Indiana would begin searching for 500 acres of land for the construction of a new tuberculosis hospital, and would settle on a site in Rockville, Indiana, among the quiet countryside of the region. This hospital would be built shortly after and would become fully operational in 1911 with the intention of offering comfort and treatment to those with tuberculosis. This hospital was divided into a men's and women's wing, and it's worth noting, tuberculosis facilities like these were purposefully isolated, thinking that the clean air and serene scenery was part of the treatment for TB. And of course they did this to prevent the spread of disease to places like cities that were more populated. As such, both wings of this building had porches on them to offer clean air to these patients, and doctors at the time deemed this clean air extremely valuable to their treatment. Like many facilities of this day and age, this new hospital, dubbed the Indiana State Tuberculosis Hospital, would be largely self-sufficient, even providing housing to the healthcare professionals that worked there. As part of this self-sufficient nature, the site had a dairy barn, a power plant, and even a greenhouse. Now, despite this setup, which was developed to try and make the disease these folks were suffering from more bearable, the treatments offered were clearly not effective. Many died soon after arriving at this hospital, and perhaps even more died and suffered through the many supposed treatments that were common for TB patients at the time, including, I kid you not, rib removal, which was an increasingly popular tactic. Through the 50s, the hospital continued expanding. But soon it wouldn't be needed anymore with the development of wide-scale streptomycin production, an antibiotic. Suddenly, the world was thrust into an age where TB was no longer a lifelong disease that would result in death, but rather a curable disease, and this eliminated the need for treatment facilities. This led to the Indiana State Sanatorium repurposing its facility to be a mental health treatment facility instead, from 1976, dubbing it Lee Allen Bryant Healthcare Center until 2011. Around this time, the property, now over 100 years old, was starting to show its age, and it was no longer profitable to operate. In 2011, thus, the facility would close for good, leaving everything from gurneys to equipment behind. All of this being said, while the facility closed down, the so-called Indiana State Sanatorium remained strangely active, if you believe the rumors, that is. We'll start with Adams Hall. Here, if you were to explore this building, it's said that you'd hear footsteps making their way throughout the hallways, and that your entire time in this building, which to your eyes may appear empty, you'll get the eerie sensation that you're being watched. Some say this is because you are in fact being watched. Also, while I completely understand the joy of putting on a clean pair of socks, it's said that some enjoyed this so much that they decided to stick around and do more laundry for all of eternity. Thus, the old laundry area is supposedly haunted as all get out. Here it's said that there's tons of poltergeist activity. Laundry machines that have been without power for ages are said to sometimes turn on their own, beginning their spin cycles to the dismay of visitors. Also, objects in the room are hurled about and known to move. It's certainly not a comforting place to spend time for the living. Beyond this, throughout the property and even on the property grounds, it's said that apparitions are a common sight. One of the more common ones is a woman's figure who is said to frequent the laundry facilities and old offices. Some even posit that she may be the one lurking around the laundry room and throwing things. Additionally, these apparitions are known to be a bit chatty. It's said that male and female voices are heard throughout the building and that EVPs are abundant for visitors at the facility. These EVPs are often voices, but appropriately for the history of the facility, are sometimes said to be the coughs of patients from the past. Regardless of what its past was, though, you can still visit this haunted place in the present. Today, this facility is open to the public, offering tours of the old facility and even allowing ghost hunting on the multi-hundred-acre premises. If you fancy yourself a ghost catcher, this may be your golden ticket to meeting someone from the other side. Man, when you hear a name like the Slippery Noodle, you know it's going to be a good time, and the Slippery Noodle Inn in Indianapolis immediately caught my eye because of its name. According to their website, this slightly wanton-sounding eatery and event venue was founded in the 1850s, originally bearing the name Tremont House, and it claims to be the oldest continually operating bar in its original building. Again, a very specific accolade, but an accolade nonetheless. This spot, historically, has been owned by those of German heritage. This influence is perhaps why its second name was the Concordia House, being named after the first German Lutheran immigrant ship to land in the so-called New World, the Concorde. Eventually, this place would have the name Germania House until around the First World War, at which point, for obvious reasons, people avoided sounding German for a little while. It then went by a few more related names because of its owner for the time, Walter Moore, including the name Moore Restaurant during Prohibition, which still snuck beer to its guests in the basement. Ultimately, in the 1960s, Harold and Lorianne Yagi bought the bar, and apparently the name Slippery Noodle Inn got its name from this individual, Harold. It has had this name ever since, though the Yagi family did sell the establishment about a year or two ago from the looks of it. Now, it's on the list of places where dead people hang out, so as you'd expect, some gnarly stuff has gone on here. For instance, in the Civil War period, it was a stop on the Underground Railroad. Additionally, in 1953, two customers in this building that was briefly a bordello, which is a nice fancy way of saying a brothel, killed each other over a working woman, which is admittedly a silly person to get in a fight over. Well, technically only one of them died, but you get it. This spot was also used as a slaughterhouse and a butchery for a while, chopping up cattle and swine in the basement. Also, it looks like literally about a year ago, in December of 2023, a woman's body was found on the building's roof. Holy moly. Anyways, I guess because of all of this hustle and bustle inside of the Slippery Noodle, it is thought to be haunted. Some of the sources I'm reading say that it's even haunted on all 3 levels, which I mean, yeah, of course it is. You think ghosts can't go upstairs? Anyways, one of the ghosts here in Old Nudes is named George. Yes, just simply George. Now, George's haunting is relatively simple. He wasn't killed here or anything, but rather George was an old caretaker of the property. And after he died, I guess he didn't know what else to do but keep working. Because of this, George is said to haunt the basement of the building in a pair of overalls, and in particular is known to spook workers delivering kegs to the basement. There's also a dude that actually passed away here, a cowboy sort of character that supposedly passed away in a knife fight while this building was a brothel. Apparently here to join him are phantom working women, who have been seen and even swooned over by some men on the second floor, including one who describes herself as the madame of the brothel. It's even said that some of the old people that had a ticket on the Underground Railroad didn't make it to their final stop, and decided to stay here in the bar instead. Heck, even the old owner, Harold Yagi, would host ghost tours before he himself departed, and he kept records of these ghost stories told by his patrons and experienced some himself. Now, in terms of what these old visitors to the Slippery Noodle do, it seems they mostly just like to see what's going on in the new establishment. But also, wine bottles have been found open around the basement and the second floor, areas mostly known for storage. And, I feel like we saw something similar like this before in an inn in Ohio, didn't we? It's almost like employees like to enjoy a sip of wine from time to time, and conveniently have ghosts to blame. Hey, I can't blame them. Customer-facing roles are tough as all get out. Anyways, these days, the Slippery Noodle remains operational as a bar and is known for its live music. Oh man, in Portland, Indiana, we've got another cemetery where you've got to count things. This is going to be metal. Man, Sesame Street's Count Von Count would have a heck of a time in Indiana cemeteries between this one and 100 Steps Cemetery. Anyways, in Portland, Indiana, there's a cemetery named Finch Cemetery that rests on the property of the Jay County Conservations Club, and there are a lot of rumors about this place, with the foremost being that the graves here have a knack for disappearing, rearranging themselves, or producing some other weird phenomena. Another important detail related to this weird cemetery is that there's an individual here that has Cinderella inscribed onto their gravestone. Well, kind of. It's actually spell-wronged and says Cinderella, but it's missing an E, the last E. Regardless, this individual was supposedly a boy in life and was named Cinderella Steed. But it may have been a daughter, sources aren't entirely sure. The urban legend surrounding this gravesite, for whatever reason, combines this so-called property of graves that disappear and rearrange with the Cinderella gravestone to say that if you count the graves moving towards Cinderella's grave, you'll count to 13. But if you count again as you walk back, you'll only count 11 graves. I don't know if this makes the graveyard haunted or if this means you're bad at math, but if this phenomenon occurs to you, one of these is certainly true. So I'm covering the Devil's Hollow because I got some requests to cover it in the comments of my last Indiana video. But I'll be honest, I'm not sure this is a ghost story, at least not as it's usually told online. It's kind of an almost ghost story. It's just the people that died never actually came back to haunt it in most iterations. Regardless, it's an interesting story and a somber story with mystery thrown in, so I'll humor ya and cover it, and I'll tell both versions for ya. In short, around Perry Township, behind the Cedar Canyon sector, an area I was surprised I could find so easily on Google Maps, there's an area that in modern day is called the Devil's Hollow, and this area harks back to a small farm atop a hill overlooking some farmland, and a wooden bridge overlooking Cedar Creek, which I think still exists today. If you want to find this place, the hint I found online says that if you're on Cedar Canyon Road, right after Auburn Road, the road will go up a hill. And if you look it up, you can see the chimney stack standing from a house that burnt down a while back. Here lived a farmer, his wife, and their son. The son, being patriotic, decided to go out to World War I when he was called to serve his country, and his mother, when he left, lit a lantern in front of the house. She kept this lit every night, hoping that he would return, but he never did. And the mother would go into poor health and die when her son never returned home after the war, presumably passing away and never being identified. The father, most thought, remained in good health, and after the passing of his son and wife, kept himself busy, weaving the farm's fence with sticks and branches into strange shapes and patterns. Now most just thought he was making it look fancy, but shortly the father would, pass away by his own hands, and leave behind a note that simply read, "Read the fence." Well, people would read the fence, but they could never decipher what he meant to say. Despite this, it's said that occasionally, for whatever reason, even with the farmer gone, for a long time, locals continued to see that lantern lit on the doorstep of the home atop the hill. There's also a legend I read of a couple of places that connect to the old burnt-down home you can see today. If you believe this version, it's said that people believed the woman, like the mother of the soldier, to be a witch, and did what you do to witches. They trapped her inside of the home atop the hill and burned the place to the ground, with the witch perishing in the fire, or at least her body. Today it's said because of this, the ruins are the home of cult activity and individuals that show up to pay homage to the old witch, who occasionally will appear in spectral form and chase those non-cult affiliated off of her land. In Putnam County, there are 9 covered bridges, many of which have a haunted story to call their own, but one of them stands out among the rest as perhaps being the most haunted bridge or covered bridge in the whole state. This bridge, the Edna Collins Bridge, also sometimes referred to as the Baby Bridge because it's the newest of the 9 bridges, was built in 1922 by one Charles Hendricks, who I don't think is related to the late Jimmy, and it passes over one Little Walnut Creek. Funny enough, this bridge replaced what would have been a more modern concrete bridge that got washed away in the early 1900s. Now, if you've followed this channel for a while, you'll know there are bunches and bunches of crybaby bridge sorts of legends, and this bridge fits that mold. Lore claims it's haunted by a mother and daughter, with the child actually being Edna Collins herself, a child that lived in the area and liked to go for a swim in Little Walnut Creek. As the story goes, her parents would take her here and drop her off, and she'd go for a little swim. And when they returned, they'd honk 3 times, and she'd usually come back up to greet them. Except one day, after these honks, young Edna did not come up to greet them, and the parents found that she had drowned in the creek. Some versions of the story say the mother also passed away here by her own hands, having been consumed by her grief, and that perhaps this bridge's builder, Charles Hendricks, was actually the one that built this bridge as a sort of memorial to his lost family, aka Charles Hendricks was the father. Now, as the story goes, old Edna and her mother didn't actually leave, and they say that you can summon the duo if you, too, do what the family did back in the day. Show up in your car and honk 3 times. It's said that if you do this, you might see the apparition of little Edna, or maybe when you stop the car and give it a look, you'll find child-sized handprints on your vehicle. The mother, on the other hand, is said to appear if you hang a piece of rope from the sign of a nearby church. It's said that if you do this, you'll see her shadowy apparition appear on the bridge. So I usually just leave off a haunting with the legend and move on, but here I actually found a related story by an individual on Reddit that gave me a chill or two. Now, the individual that made this comment deleted it, so out of respect I won't list his old username, but according to him, he and his brother went to Edna Collins Bridge with one of their friends. They got there at about midnight, turned off their car, and honked 3 times, and as they sit there in the dark, they heard a scream. The individual said they can still hear that scream too. They then heard footsteps running towards them, and as they began to nope the heck out of there, they saw in the distance another car, sitting, idling on the bridge where they just were, where they were all alone. Anyways, apparently they pulled out of there and went about 125 miles an hour and only stopped their car when they got to Walmart. I guess because that's approximately a no combat zone like from a video game, but upon inspecting their car there, they noticed that handprints lined the rear of their car. Apparently this trio made the wise decision never to return to Edna Collins Bridge. So it's said that throughout Indiana, you're going to find 15 restaurants named Hacienda Mexican Restaurant. It's just a nice sit-down chain Mexican spot, and frankly, when I think of chain anythings, my first thought isn't haunted. Like, can you in your right mind picture anything scarier in a McDonald's or Taco Bell than what will happen to your digestive system if you eat off of the value menu? I personally cannot. Regardless, Hacienda Mexican Restaurant began in 1979 in the mansion of an old brewer in Mishawaka, Indiana, and it's said that this old mansion is what's haunted. So I couldn't really find any details on the mansion's history, but the story goes that the apparition of an old maid is the primary apparition in the building. You know the story here already, I bet. Maid has an affair with wealthy homeowner. Homeowner suddenly goes Disney villain mode and ignores her when she gets pregnant. Maid offs herself. It's sad stuff, really. And honestly, back in the day, this may have been more common than you think. But it's said that this resulted in this maid being a ghost here, and still dwelling in the attic, where she did the deed. Because of this, it's said that as you sit and eat your 4-pound burrito, yes, they serve one of these, God help you if you eat it, you'll find yourself hearing footsteps in the rooms above you, and sometimes even the sounds of a broom brushing against the floor. Beyond this, it's said that after the maid's passing, perhaps after being racked with guilt, the owner of the mansion too perished, perhaps from a bullet, if you catch my drift. Regardless, the owner still treats the place like his own personal palace, turning lights on and off, messing with appliances, and leaving the sink running in the bathroom, wasting water and such. Now, if you want to come enjoy a haunted 4-pound burrito, head on down to the original restaurant in Mishawaka, Indiana. A haunted Mexican restaurant is certainly new to my lists, and I do love a chimichanga, so if I'm in the area, count me in. If you made it to the end of this list, thank you so much for watching, Indiana. You are crazy haunted. Heck, I still have a list of about 50 haunted places in Indiana in front of me that I could have included, but man, that would have taken me another week or two to finish. Anyways, going forward, first, tell me, did you like the Amazing Places video for Kentucky, and do you want one of those for your state? If so, comment it below. Otherwise, we put out Florida's Weird Stuff video, sorry for that being late, and next up I'm going to put out a video that I think might perform pretty well. I'm hoping so at least. It's urban legends that turned out to be true. Let me know what you think about it. After that, I'm looking at some more Weird Stuff videos, probably some version 2s, and then some cold cases. Maybe one for Tennessee, we'll see. Anyways, that's it for channel news, and with all of this being said, whether you just got a bit gassy at a haunted Mexican restaurant, or if you turned on the blue lamp in your hotel room and saw a picture on the wall flip upside down, don't you ever forget, it's always story time.